Hello, everyone. Another day, another day, another
Another day, another
lecture.
dollar.
Another dollar. Yeah, I guess you could say that. Okay, so what's the story today? Well, I was gonna go into continue with the atom, but I'm gonna have to postpone that because we have like an emergency that came up, and that's the issue of what is philosophy. And
What?
they came up in yeah, because let's put it in the right context. I put philosophy under science. I'm saying philosophy is a branch of science. That's not what people out there typically understand by philosophy. People out there think that philosophy is just, oh, it's a way of thinking. Your way of thinking, your philosophy. That's the notion people have in the back of their minds. Today I'm going to argue that's ordinary speech. It's not scientific language. And you can say, well, philosophy is not part of science, and I'm going to argue exactly the opposite. I'm going to say that philosophy is a branch of science, and the reason we need it is that we have physics, which deals with objects, mechanisms, and causes, and then we have to have some way of explaining, because science is about explaining, right? We have to have a way of explaining things related to concepts such as love, intelligence, information, those kinds of things. These are concepts, and we have to be able to deal with also with reasons and purpose. What are we going to call that? Well, I decided to call it philosophy, and let me tell you why. It all comes down to the definition of philosophy. And let's start there. Let's see what philosophy means. First, from a historical point of view, I'm going to go kind of swift here, but try to keep in mind that we're trying to get to a definition of philosophy. Okay, this is where it starts. We have here. This is an old version of philosophy. It comes from ancient times, and essentially it says, "Look, philosophy is the love of wisdom." Okay? The study of general and fundamental problems concerning matters such as existence, knowledge, values, reason, mind, and language. That's what the big Wikipedia says. In other words, they bunched everything in there. Existence, ontology, knowledge, which is epistemology, values, reason, mind, language, cooking, sewing, everything is, philosophy is everything. That's essentially what these people are saying. Where did they get all this? Well, it says in the early stages of Greek. This comes from the Catholic Encyclopedia. And by the way, it's interesting to note that the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy does not have a definition of philosophy. And that's kind of interesting. They do have a definition of knowledge, which is we don't know what it is. That's the definition of knowledge.
Could it be that too many people use it with too many different definitions, so they don't bother defining it?
That's part of the problem, but it's deeper than that, and we'll show that today. It says, look, in the early stages of Greek, as of every other civilization, so it's not only the Greeks, right? We're talking about the Eastern religions, all these philosophers, etc. The boundary line between philosophy and other departments of human knowledge was not sharply defined, and philosophy was understood to mean every striving towards knowledge. Everything striving towards. I must have missed a word. I don't know, but it says every striving toward. Maybe I erased the word there. Maybe it's everything striving towards knowledge, or every, pursuit striving towards knowledge. And it says, okay, it continues. It says, look, what is knowledge? Knowledge of the causes and reasons of things. Plato called it the acquisition of knowledge. Aristotle called it first causes and principles. And philosophy is the science which considers first and universal causes. Wisdom considers the first causes of all causes.
I guess the every striving towards knowledge you would call philosophy. Every type of striving.
Right.
That's what they mean by every striving towards knowledge.
Oh, okay, so maybe I didn't miss a word. Anyways, the point is that Plato looked at it as acquisition of knowledge, and Aristotle looked at it as causes and principles. In other words, we have to establish the foundations of something, of whatever it is that we're trying to establish, but we have to establish some foundations, and he calls it causes and principles. And then the summary there is philosophy is the science Notice they use the word science. Philosophy is the science, right? Science meaning knowledge, because that's what science means, right? Science is a synonym of the word knowledge. It comes from scire, from the Latin, from the Romans, that referred to this thing we call science. They refer to it as scire, or knowledge, which considers first and universal causes. Wisdom considers the first causes of all causes. We're talking about God or Big Bang. I don't know what they're referring to there. But the point here is it considers universal causes. Now, under the rational scientific method, causes is strictly physics. And these guys are assigning that to philosophy. So just keep that in mind in the back.
That's the way you define it.
Correct, yeah. But keep that in the back of your mind. I have a difference there, okay? And now let's go with the next step. It says, in general, this comes also from the Catholic Encyclopedia. They just kind of synthesize this. They say, in general, modern philosophers may be said to have adopted this way of looking at it. In other words, they pretty much followed Plato and Aristotle. Here's Descartes. By the term philosophy, we denote the pursuit of wisdom, pretty much like the other two guys. Locke, John Locke, philosophy is the true knowledge of things. Bishop Berkeley, the study of wisdom and truth. Kant, a science, again, right? Study of the general principles of knowledge and of the ultimate objects attainable by knowledge. And Hegel and other German philosophers, which were very popular in the 19th century, especially in the first half, it is the general teaching of science. What is science? Knowledge, right? And then Spencer, another philosopher, completely unified knowledge. Okay, so obviously everybody's pretty much from Greek all the way to the German philosophers of the 19th centuries and beyond. They looked at philosophy as the study of knowledge or related to knowledge in some way.
It seems to be like the overarching term that kind of the bag
that holds it all.
That holds all knowledge that humanity has ever acquired.
Yeah, in other words,
everything we've ever known, kind of like the internet. The internet is philosophy. Everything we've ever known is philosophy.
Okay, that's a good way of putting it. The internet is knowledge. Okay, so now we have a general idea that philosophy somehow is related to knowledge, or knowledge is a strong word within this term that we're going to define called philosophy.
Knowledge,
right?
Or wisdom or truth, they seem to be interchangeable.
Correct. And so, okay, so let's get to it. Let's see what we mean by knowledge. And here it is. Knowledge, being a primitive fact of consciousness, cannot strictly speaking be defined. That's the Catholic Encyclopedia. Here's the Wikipedia. The definition of knowledge is a matter of ongoing debate among philosophers in the field of epistemology. In philosophy, the study of knowledge is called epistemology. Plato famously defined knowledge as justified true belief. Though this definition is now thought by some analytic philosophers to be problematic, several definitions of knowledge and theories to explain it exist. In other words, we have many versions of what knowledge is to different people, and we don't have a definition of the word knowledge under any possible source.
It's a tricky one.
And so so we have philosophy as the study of knowledge or related to knowledge, but we don't know what knowledge is.
Well, we kind of have.
That's where we are at today.
We have like a fuzzy idea. It's one of those
fuzzy
that we haven't defined precisely. But if I say knowledge, someone else
after 10,000 years.
If I say knowledge, someone else kind of knows what I mean. It's kind of like time.
Kind of.
It's one of those.
Kind of knows.
Where we all kind of like.
Kind of knows what knowledge.
Knowledge. Yeah. If I say I know, they kind of have an idea of what I mean. But no.
Kind of knows what knows means. Okay, I got it. You see why I had to define what philosophy is and also what knowledge is. I have defined the word knowledge.
Yeah, but I remember I had a big...
And people don't like my definition, obviously, because it destroys their religion.
No,
that's the only reason.
Crappy definition.
No. Besides, I'm in charge, I'm the boss, I'm the guy who decides what is true and what is not true.
Take
and
it
so
away, boss.
I overrule you. Okay, so period. That's the end of the discussion there. Okay. So I had to define what philosophy is, and obviously, I have a different idea of what philosophy is, and again, I try to relate it to science, because I'm saying philosophy is part of science. It's a branch of science, and the purpose is to deal with concepts, reasons, and purpose. Those are the main three. What are we talking about when we're here? Let me put the chart first up here, okay, so that you can follow along. But here's the chart.
Well, real quick, it's funny how you put it on its head. They make science a branch of philosophy,
Yeah.
while you make philosophy
A branch of science. Correct. That's true. And I'm saying it's one of the two branches. There's only two branches of science. One is physics, and the other one is philosophy.
Why is religion up there?
Okay, I'll go. It's important because, see, people consider religion a philosophy or part of philosophy or related to philosophy. I'm saying religion has nothing to do with philosophy as defined by rational philosophy, by a rational scientific method. Okay, what does rational science do? It explains. Punct, period, dot, stop. Science is about explaining, not about describing, not about your opinions, not about your beliefs. It's about objectively explaining a mechanism or cause in the case of physics, and about, reasons and purpose in the case of philosophy. It's got to be rational. What do we mean by rational? Well, I've defined that in a previous discussion, but in general terms, it's for the purposes of physics, you don't want to use concepts as objects. That's the main one. But then you have to have definitions. You can't use words that are undefined or that are loosely defined and allow you to get through a loophole or through a tangent. You have to define them rigorously if they make your case. We need to know what that word means for you or for the purpose of your theory. And then also the theory has to follow from your assumptions. In the case of physics, very straightforward. The prosecutor cannot present a knife and then talk about how the guy was killed with poison or with a gun. It doesn't follow from what he presented as his exhibits. So there's got to be a relationship between the theory and the assumptions. Okay, so if you present a knife as part of your assumptions, that it's got to do with the crime, you can't later on say, oh, she died, because she drank poison. There's no relationship to what you presented. And so these things have to be kept not only for physics, but also for philosophy. There's got to be a relationship between the theory, the explanation, and the assumptions that you made as the foundations for that theory.
In other words, it has to be at least logical.
Yeah.
Logical in the sense that
that follows from.
If B follows from A, you can't halfway through make C follow from A instead.
Yeah, it's got to have some kind of logic. You got to be able to. You as the audience who are listening to the theory, you got to be able to make sense of it.
No, you know what it is? It's the presenter has to set a set of rules that he himself or she himself or themselves will abide by. It's like programming. You write code, and then you have to abide by the code that you put forward.
Correct.
The assumption is basically the rules that you put.
Correct.
These are the rules that I'm gonna put. And if all of a sudden you start breaking your own rules, now we got a problem.
Yeah, and again, if you look at that, rational science, okay, deals with, on one hand, it deals with physics, which is the part I'm concerned with. I'm not interested in philosophy at all. I'm not interested in analyzing what love is or how love does things. I'm not interested in why, purpose, reason. Someone went to town. Did he went to buy clothes, shoes? Did he went to there to buy a car? Did he go there because he fought with his wife and he just needed some time to think about it? I don't care about those subjects. They don't concern me. I do like history and why people do things in history, why kings killed their wives and vice versa, or why a general went to a battlefield. Those things I'm interested to some degree. But
degree.
Yeah, in other words,
you're a nerd for those things.
Yeah, but what I do is I keep them. That's a hobby. That's not my profession. Let's put it that way. But physics is my profession. Physics is what I like to do, and this is where my heart is. And I deal with objects, causes, and mechanism. But then I needed a word to represent, these concepts, reasons, and purpose. And as you can see, I put objective on the bottom of those two piles. And I'm saying that, an explanation has to be objective. Johnny went to town to buy a car. And the other guy said, well, I have a different theory. What's your theory? Well, my theory is Johnny went to town to buy some shoes or to escape his wife. These are theories. And it's objective. It's straightforward.
Wait, real quick. Is theories answering a question?
Yeah, in a way it is. It's a why or how.
Because I would say, add to all this that any science is by definition, my definition, it has to be answering a question.
Yeah, you're trying to answer a question. You're trying to explain how something happened.
But that's what explaining is. You're answering a question.
Yeah, in other words, what I'm saying is the question you're answering in physics, what happened?
No.
Or how it happened.
Back to the one you were talking about with Johnny went to the town.
Yeah. Philosophy.
The answer the question we're trying to answer.
What is the purpose or reason? What is the reason? What is the purpose?
Reason he went to town? And you're saying that one guy has this answer, theory.
Different theory.
This guy got that theory with theories answering a question.
And so that's the context of science. That's where we should put physics and philosophy. And the purpose here is to cover concepts and objects, reasons and causes, purpose and mechanisms.
So basically, anytime a question is posed, it falls under science.
If it's a how or why, I guess I'd have to think a little more about that. I'm not prepared to answer that question.
There's no question that doesn't fall under those two.
Okay, no, but there could be a question of who did this. That's not a question of philosophy. Who did this is not even a question of physics, because because it could be an opinion. It's like I'm going to say Johnny did this, and the other guy says no, Sally did this, and those are opinions.
But there is a person who did it. I guess maybe history might be some weird.
Again, I have to think about it, but I think, or where, like in the case of quantum mechanics, they talk about where the electron is. I don't care where the electron is. It's got no meaning in science, as far as I'm concerned. So I don't care where the electron is. And they say, look, we have an equation, a Schrodinger equation.
Where is the apple?
But it applies really to, because these people come up with the equation, Schrodinger's equation that we dealt with yesterday, and they say, oh, this is science. Oh, why is it science? Because it tells us where the electron is. It gives us the probability where to find the electron. I don't give a damn where we can find the electron if it's not even a bead.
It's answering a question, but it's not answering a scientific question.
And that's my point. So not all questions are scientific. I think we should limit science to hows and whys. What I mean by that, at least in the case of physics, is what happened? How did it happen? How did the pen fall to the floor? What caused it to fall to the floor, not to the ceiling? In the case of philosophy, we're dealing with concepts.
Why did you hit it to the floor?
Yeah, well, there's many things. You can say, what is love? Or you can...
What is love? Baby, don't hurt me.
You can go into, a lot of philosophical issues related to love, to information, to abstractions that don't concern physics, but are valid for science if you're going to do an explaining, some explaining. If you want to explain something about love, that should be, or psychology, why someone did something. Why did he kill this person? Why is he crazy? Why does he have this tic or whatever? All these things do involve explanations, and if they're explanations, they're rational explanations, they should be included within the body of science. And that's why I put the word philosophy in there. And since no one has defined it in 10,000 years, I am free to use the word philosophy under rational science.
I would say it's a good start.
Yeah.
It's a good start in the right direction, but I think it's far from finished, this setup.
Again, it's a proposal, and I'm not interested in philosophy, so I'm probably not the right person to define this. But I'm kicking the ball so that someone who is interested in philosophy can take it from there. Now, the great problem here is that we've all been educated to think of philosophy as something totally different. Again, a love of wisdom, knowledge. They put causes, first cause. They put all that religion. It's all bunched up into philosophy. In fact, like my son here says, he says, everything, science even, is bunched up under philosophy. And I read once, I can't quote it verbatim, but something like that. Philosophy is the mother of all science, including physics. It's like it's the foundation of science. You need a philosophy. All that I'm saying is nonsense. That's the ordinary speech version of philosophy. Now I'm defining rational philosophy specifically. I'm saying rational philosophy is explanations that deal with concepts, reasons, and purpose.
Yeah, but aren't we?
Okay, now we have it.
We're missing a big piece here.
Good, bring it on.
Which is this.
What's troubling you, my son?
The biggest problem with all this is the problem with beliefs and assumptions.
Okay. Now let's get to. Let me cover that first, and then you can follow up. Okay. Now, if you look at the chart here, you'll find where I put beliefs and opinions. I put it under religion. Religion is not about gods. Religion is not about spirits. It's not about angels, about heaven or hell. It's about opinions and belief. If you have an opinion, that's your religion. It's not your philosophy, it's your religion. It's very subjective. That's why I put the word subjective under the opinions and beliefs. But religion also includes irrational theories and supernatural theories. And those could be objective or subjective. It doesn't matter. They're still religion because they have nothing to do with rationality. Now let's look at these. What is an irrational theory? Let's go with supernatural first. Supernatural theory is one where the object is a valid object. For example, God, and I think of God as a human being, we're made in his image, so he looks like us, he looks like a human, he's got a head, 2 arms, 2 legs, etc. He's got a magic wand, he creates the universe. No problem visualizing the entire scene. I can understand the theory that the guy's trying to give me because he begins by showing, look, this is God. And if you've seen the picture, the painting made by Michelangelo, you'll know what God looks like. He's this bearded guy, he's got long hair, and he's pointing his finger, and he touches, Adam's finger. That God is a human being. He looks like us. Okay, no problem. Irrational theories, they cannot produce the objects. And why can't they produce the objects? Because they're converting concepts into objects. They use words such as energy, mass, field, and they take these concepts for objects. That's why it's an irrational theory. All of mathematical physics is irrational. All of it. 120% of it. Supernatural theories, typically the traditional religions that looked at God and brought in spirits, angels, that kind of thing. And as long as you see an angel, which is a man that's got wings and a little plate over his head, well, then at least you know what object the guy's referring to when he says the word angel. You can't do that with mathematical physics. You cannot visualize 4-dimensional space-time. You cannot visualize 0-dimensional points or singularities. You cannot visualize 1-dimensional lines or strings. So all the tools or all the objects used by mathematical physicists are totally irrational. And their theories are irrational because they're founded on these, okay? So that's the idea. Religion involves opinions, beliefs, which are subjective, or whether objective or subjective, we reject irrational and supernatural natural theories. That's the story. That's the general breakdown here. That's why religion is not part of philosophy, not part of rational philosophy.
Why do you put irrational theories under religion?
Yeah.
Why is it under this umbrella at all?
Because it all falls under what I'll call religion. I want to separate religion from rational science. And again, I call it rational science, and I use the capital S for science because I want to distinguish it from what the mathematicians do, which they call science, and which has been called science for the last 10,000 years.
But isn't religion a misleading word in this case?
Okay, so what do you propose? Tell me what you propose.
Magic.
Yeah, magic, astrology,
magic,
any of those, they're all included
really,
under religion.
No,
yeah.
I mean instead of calling it religion, calling it magic.
Well, because
or calling it an opinion.
You could break that down and say, look, religion just involves opinions and beliefs, and magic involves what's on the right side. For example, you could do that.
Yeah, but I think opinion should be the overhead word, because religion kind of gets confusing because people think of religion by the culture, like going to mass. Praying.
And again, and this is where the error is. The error is that we have been led to believe that religion is about going to church, believing in God. No. Religion is belief. Any belief is religion.
Why not
I have my religion, you have your religion.
Instead of calling it religion, maybe beliefs.
Yeah, belief is one of the aspects of religion.
No.
There is no religion that has no belief. That's a common. It's a common thread
of belief. I think it's the other way around.
No, well,
I think belief should be the overhead one. It's more straightforward and no one gets confused.
I want to confuse people because I want people to think, and people don't think. They just say, "Oh, tradition says that religion is this," and that's where it's wrong. We have to label this in some way and show that we have this umbrella over here, which is science, and we have this other umbrella over here, which is religion. And religion involves always belief, always opinion, and it always involves, or not always, but it in addition involves irrational and supernatural theories, explanations for things.
It's funny because we're kind of doing exactly what we were talking about with the elementary,
particles?
Standard model. Or we're not really doing any science. We're really just categorizing.
We're categorizing.
It's helpful for the discussion.
And the reason also I do this is to make it crisp. I want to make it yes, no, on, off, on, off, black or white. Okay. I want to contrast so that people say, okay, this is science and this is religion. What is religion? Your opinion. So when I tell you that I believe in my theory of, thread theory, or I believe that, Mother Nature does her work with the rope, electromagnetic rope, that's my religion. And you should take it for such. Even in the course of a dissertation, if I talk about it, you say, okay, that part of it, his talk was religion. Let's get to the meat, to the facts, to the objective part. What is the mechanism he proposes? That's what you got to concentrate on. So there's no problem in mixing religion or belief, together with explanation, with objective explanation. No problem. Just make sure that you can distinguish the two and say, okay, that part is the religion part, the belief part, the opinion part. But then the explanation also is divided into rational and irrational. If it's rational, it falls under science. If it's irrational, it falls under, again, religion. And we have criteria for what rationality is that is objective. And that is, if you use a concept as an object, that's irrational. If you do not define a word or use it inconsistently throughout your dissertation, that's irrational. And if your theory, your explanation doesn't follow from your assumptions, from the hypothesis, that's irrational. So we do have objective criteria. Whether you like it or not, that's irrelevant. My point here is those are what we're proposing for what we call rational science.
What was the word that we used when instead of definition, it was criteria?
Criteria.
Like
set of criteria.
You're setting up criteria to make this all legible. Kind of make
black and white, crisp, on and off, so that you can distinguish.
So you can just look at the chart. Okay, are we
here or are we here
right now, or are we doing religion?
And that's the main. And that's the main point, that we can look at the chart and just get an overall feel for what is science and what is not. And I'm saying that what is not science, we'll call that religion. You may not like the word, may not like the way I'm using these words. I don't, it's not important. I'm saying that we're going to call religion anything which is not science. And philosophy is science, therefore religion is not a part of science. Religion is a way of thinking, but philosophy is not a way of thinking. Philosophy is a way of presenting in a rational manner a theory that doesn't involve objects. In other words, does not harp on the objects. It harps on concepts, reasons, and purpose. Okay? As long as you stay within that, you're rational, and there's no reason why you can't have a theory of, like, I use the example of why Napoleon went to Waterloo. Well, maybe he went to steal. Maybe he went because he wanted glory. Maybe he went to die. Maybe he thought he was just going to die. That was his last battle. Maybe he went there because his wife told him to go there. All these theories you've got out there, fine. But you present it in an objective manner. You don't say, oh, I believe that, and you should believe that, Napoleon went there for such and such reason. No, that part is religion. You just say, look, my theory is this. Okay, fine. And now I heard you, now let's hear this other guy. And then we can compare theories and make up our own minds. So science is not about having made up your mind belief, but about understanding what the other guy is proposing as far as an explanation.
Seeking, not finding. We're back to that.
No, because you don't, whether you find or not, that's again an issue of every individual. It depends on your biases, depends on your formation, your education, many factors. And so everybody's going to draw something different from an explanation, and they're going to believe different things. In fact, different aspects of the same explanation. That's fine. But that part is religion. That's what is truth to you, what they've proven to you personally. But we should separate that from the objective part, which is what is the mechanism. And again, when we go back to quantum mechanics, they don't have an objective mechanism for how a gluon pulls two quarks together.
Hold on, I want to go deep on the problem.
Yeah. I'm just giving you this example, saying that's why isn't that part of science? Because under no circumstance can they produce a mechanism where particle pulls two particles together. So that's why that falls under religion. It falls under the irrational explanation part of religion. Okay, yeah, go ahead. What do you have?
Okay, so the biggest problem with all this comes back to beliefs and assumptions.
Okay, you don't like that.
Not that I don't like it, but there's still
loose ends.
There's a loose end here.
Okay.
Which is that assumptions usually follow from beliefs. In fact,
but that's irrelevant, because when I'm explaining objectively to you, I don't say I believe. No, you should say, look, I'm going to make an assumption that God exists. What do I mean by that? Well, let's define exist. Well, physical presence, object that has location. So we're saying God is an object and he has location. We're going to treat him as a he, right? A man. Okay, so we're done. We've covered that base. And now you explain your theory. How did he make the universe? Or why is a rose so perfect? Well, because he made it that way. He tailored it that way. Fine. Then you can understand what the guy is proposing. Whether you believe in his explanation or not, that's a separate issue. But you can follow his explanation because you have the objects. You have the God, you have the rose. You can say, okay, I know what he's talking about. You understand. You have communication.
That was the word that I was missing. It was beliefs, assumptions, and understanding. The only way someone can really understand what you're saying is if they can understand the assumption. To understand an assumption, you got to be already like 99% of the way, and then I'm just going to change, the God part, The assumption, I'm going to take on board the God part. Like, okay, I don't believe in God, but let's assume it, right?
Right.
But 99% of the way, like, we both kind of have the same idea of what we're talking about.
Maybe, because you could introduce something new, like they introduce new words in quantum every day. I mean, you saw the other day, we have exotic atoms. What the hell does that term mean? Well, it means that instead of electron, you have a muon or whatever, pion. So they introduce new terms, and you have to more or less, present that at the assumption stage. You say, look, I'm going to be talking today. I'm going to be explaining something today that concerns exotic atoms. The guy says, what is an exotic atom? I never heard of that. Okay, an exotic atom is this. So the guy defines it, and you say, okay, now I understand. Or makes a picture if it's an object. He gives you a picture of it, and you say, okay, I understand now. Now I can follow your presentation.
Okay.
It doesn't mean you're going to believe in it. It just means now I'm going to try to understand what you're talking about.
That's the question. And I want you to go slow on this because this is going to be a tricky one.
Whoa.
What does it take to get someone to understand something?
I use a baseball bat.
Until they understand.
I use baseball bat therapy. Well, there's a couple things. And again, what do you get for someone to understand? The assumptions he's talking about. We're still at the hypothesis stage, okay? It takes a picture and it takes definitions above all. Those two are non-negotiable. For physics, let's start at physics, okay? Because then we have philosophy. But for physics, you present the object. You know, I'm going to talk about magnetism. I start with magnets. I'm saying this is a magnet, okay? And first I show it, and then I might have to describe it and say, look, it's got certain magical powers. It does this, this, and that. And then I have to define the key terms that I'm going to be using. You know, if I'm going to use the word field, fine, use the word field. What is a field? And then I have to define that word and say, okay, this is what it means so that you can follow.
But you have to define it in the way that they understand.
Correct, okay, but you define it, and the guy might say, well, I still don't understand. You define it a little more, and I still don't understand, until the guy understands the concept. And of course, he's welcome to challenge that. I can present God as an object. I can say, God is a human being. He's got 2 arms, a head, legs, body. Well, what do you mean? You mean God is like me? Well, he's a little more supernatural. He's, a big guy out there. He's beyond the universe. So I got to explain a little bit. It's not sufficient that I just show a picture of God. I got to give him some properties, and that's where you have to kind of work on your hypothesis, because the person's going to question you, the non-believer, the guy who has problem understanding that there is a human out there that has all these magical powers. He might question you. Well, why can he do this? Why does he have total knowledge? Can he do this? Can he do that? So he's gonna bombard you with questions to try to get an understanding of who this God guy is.
But that's an interesting kind of dichotomy between understanding and accepting, temporarily accepting.
Conceding, granting.
Granting. It's like, at what point do you grant? But I mean, for sure you have to understand everything at least. But at what point do you say, okay, I don't need to know so much nitty gritty. I'm just going to grant.
And that depends on every listener. In other words, some reporters ask more questions than other reporters. Others say,
even
I
if
understood.
They understand.
Right.
One reporter was everything so far, like God.
And maybe that's sufficient to understand the theory. As long as you have enough information to understand the theory, you don't have to play devil's advocacy to an extreme level. You can say, okay, I understand now what you're talking about. Continue with your theory.
Then the question goes, how do they know that they've understood enough to understand the theory until they've heard the theory?
That might, you might have to go back and forth and say, okay, then I have a problem with your hypothesis, your assumptions, because now you use here, and I didn't know how you were going to use it in your theory. Now that I know your theory, let's go back to your hypothesis and let's question that. And that's okay.
It seems more
you
like
go back and forth.
It's
a debate. It's a discussion. And again, many presenters say, look, hold all questions until the end.
Yeah, that's hard.
Sometimes you got to do that because maybe you cover the bases as you go along, and if you don't, then the guy can ask a question and say, okay, look, you started your theory with this hypothesis, with this assumption, and then you went on with this point here that I didn't understand because it doesn't coincide with your assumption.
At least the way as that I understood it.
Right, and now you have to clarify that point, and that's the way science works. That's the discussion of science. But at least as a primer, as a foundation, I think you have to have objects, you have to have definitions, and you have to have, the initial scene, as I call it. You have to have a starting point in your movie. Say, look, this is where we're starting. These are the objects, etc. This is where they're positioned. This is how I'm going to start my movie, and this is what I'm going to explain with this movie.
Yeah,
the mechanism, the cause or mechanism, I'm going to explain.
In the kitchen, whenever we're doing science.
Oh, I have the baseball bat whenever we do that. I hold the baseball bat. I never let go of that.
But that's real science when we're just going back and forth and really trying to get to the bottom of something. We're not debating. We're not arguing. It's a discussion. Because I define those three differently. A debate is when you're talking to each other for someone else. An argument is when you're doing it for, ego or whatever other stuff. And the discussion is when you're actually trying to figure something out together.
Okay, I call it all discussion, debate. I call them all. For me, those are all synonyms.
We're going to use my definitions. So when we're doing in the kitchens, we're doing a discussion because we're going back and forth. Like, I'll go off on a tangent, and you might not understand some bit of it because you didn't understand a part. I understood something about my assumption that you didn't understand.
Okay, and then we clarify that.
But that's the thing.
Because that's when you go deeper into that little thing, because it might be troubling. One guy has a different idea of what that thing is or means to him, and the other person has a different meaning or has a different angle to it, and that's where you kind of converge upon finally a point where there's a meeting of the minds.
So many times
we're on the same page.
One of us
finally,
will be going off on a tangent, and the other guy will be like, wait, you said something there, and the first guy will be like, no, that's not important, and no, it is important. it's like a bump in the road.
For one guy it's important, for the other guy it's not, and say no, then we're not communicating here because we're not on the same page yet, and we don't have a meeting of the minds, and sometimes you have to dissect that little point because it's a troubling, it's an obstacle to understanding.
But then does the format of science play a big role? If it's done in a presentation, if it's done one-on-one discussion, if it's done in a podcast, debate.
I think the way it should work, or the way science does work, essentially
it's the most effective. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, but let's look at this.
I think
you have to. I think you start with a presentation where you have to present the subject, so that it then goes to the public for debate. Then you debate it. See, look at the peer review system. How does it work? You write a paper. That's your presentation, your manuscript. You submit it, and a group of monks, all covered, cloaked up because they're anonymous. You don't know who they are, and they go out there and debate it based on their vision of what you're explaining. They say, I don't like this. This goes against my religion. I was brought up differently. I don't agree with any of this. So they chuck it. Okay? Well, there's no discussion because your paper ended up in the trash can and never got published.
But did they understand? That's
well,
science.
They understood it in their own way, and they didn't like the understanding. They didn't like the
But then you did science if you explain something to someone, right?
Yeah, but
if they throw it in the trash.
Yeah, but then we have a problem because the discussion should be worldwide. Everybody should be able to, that's we were discussing some of that the internet, in something I presented today, that the internet should be the correct peer review system. You have a theory, you put it out there, and the world evaluates it. Everybody gets his own thing. Everybody can ask questions. Not this group of 6 mathematicians saying, we're the judges. We're going to judge whether your stuff is scientific, and if it doesn't have an equation, we do throw it in the trash can.
Actually, that's very interesting. It's kind of like the Miss Universe contest and things like that, where instead of, because there's two different judges. There's the group of judges, and then there's the world.
Right.
If 3 judges tell you look ugly, but the world is all telling you look beautiful, who cares about the 3 judges?
But that's why a lot of these.
If 6 hooded monks tell you that your theory is irrational or
whatever, they don't like it.
They don't like it.
Yeah.
But everyone else likes it. The world basically, it's like, and I'm not saying it's a popularity contest.
Yeah, it's not a democracy.
But it gives you it's not a popularity contest. That's what I want to say. It's not that more people like you if it's the world, so that's why it's a better theory. It's more like the world is more objective than a group of people. Always. If
not
strangers,
necessarily.
Yeah, because if strangers on the street tell you, man, you got a big nose, right? Or if you go to a convention of big nose people and say, oh no, you have a small nose. See, now to a small group of people who are criticizing your nose against the whole world. It's like the whole world gives you a more
except that all the world is not always well educated as well.
No, but they always tell you.
You got a gradient of education
but they always tell you
research.
Where you're wrong.
Yeah, but see, you got.
They'll at least tell you that the way that you're explaining it is wrong.
But see, you got a gradient of capacity out there of what many people don't do research. They just have opinions, and so they introduce their religion, their beliefs into a scientific context, and they don't realize you're dealing with beliefs and not with mechanism. I'm talking here about a mechanism. This guy said, well, I don't believe it. I don't care if you believe it. But did you understand it?
But then if everyone tells you that, then the way you're explaining it is wrong.
Well, 90% of the people may not. 90% of the people may be dumb blondes for all we know.
But then your science is wrong.
No, the 90% are wrong.
No,
you can't have 90% of the people believing the flat Earth
I'm not talking about the theory. I'm talking about the way you're explaining the theory. If no one's understanding it, and they all have a gripe because of something,
it could be that they don't have the foundations to understand it.
then you have to tell them those foundations. That's my point.
Okay, but then these 90%. Let's assume that's the number. Okay, just pulled it out of thin air here. Let's assume this 90% does not have the foundations of what science is, or they have a different idea because they were educated in a given way, okay, or not educated at all for that matter. Maybe they're illiterate. And so these people are going to vote for your theory and say, well, I don't like your theory. Well, you don't like it, but you didn't understand it. Well, why didn't I understand it? Well, because you have a different mentality of how science is supposed to work. You think science is belief, and that's religion. So you got to clarify these points up front. And it's not always, I don't totally agree with that.
I guess it goes back to it's the best you're going to get. I mean, there's no more people than the world to tell you what you're doing wrong.
Well, that's where you get to elitism, and that's more or less what Plato talked about. He says, philosopher kings. It's a group of people up there who know, and the masses don't know.
But do you see the
and so we can't put this to a vote democratically because it won't work.
But it's a problem with, there's pros and cons to both of them.
Correct. I totally agree there.
That's the
totally agree there. You can't circumscribe knowledge, if we'll call it that, explanations.
So we still haven't defined
science. We can't circumscribe science to an elite, and at the same time, you do want the world to understand or to participate in the process of science. But voting should be outlawed, because voting again means that you're going to go into beliefs, into whether I believe your theory, not whether you understood it. If we're talking about understanding, there could be a lot of people that don't understand it because they don't have the foundations to understand it. That's a different issue.
There's something wrong bothering me about that, because
subject for tomorrow.
We still have 12 minutes.
Yeah, but you're doing some thinking. I see all that smoke coming out of your head.
Because you're using this word foundations, but that's a cheat. Because foundations is part of your theory.
Well, no. I don't think
everything
it is.
That they don't understand is part of your
foundation theory. Is not a theory, and let's clarify that. Foundation is not an opinion, first of all, and it's not a theory. We're going to say, look, we have to it's a definition. It's criteria,
which is an assumption. Definitions are also assumptions.
It is part of the assumptions, but we have to define it. And if you don't define it, then the other guy's got to define. Someone's got to do the defining. You can
define it, but they have to understand. They have to understand the way you use the words, which is part of the assumption, which is part of the theory.
Okay, correct. He's got to understand my version of science. I got to start there and say, look, this is my version of science. And the guy's got to start by understanding that.
Way at the back.
Yeah, because you can't just jump in and say, look, I have a theory, and the guy says, well, I don't believe in your theory. Well, I don't care if you believe in my theory, because you're dealing with religion. Science only deals with mechanisms. All you got to do is understand it, not believe it. And so you got to start there, and that's very hard for people to understand already right there, because most people believe that science is about believing. They have no difference between science and religion. That's why we have this little chart, rational science chart, as I call it, where we categorize these things and say, look, are we going to do religion, belief, opinion, irrational theories, supernatural theories, or are we going to do science, which is either physics or philosophy? We're going to deal with objects, causes, and mechanisms under physics, and concepts, reasons, and purpose under philosophy. Then you have it circumscribed and say, look, do you understand the overall picture, the foundations? If the guy says, well, he might say one of two things. He might say, I understand it, I don't agree with it, or I don't understand it. So that's the first thing you have to clarify, because you can't move up to the theory if the guy doesn't even have the foundations of what science is.
Yeah. But then,
and then he's got to provide an alternative. Say, okay, then if that's not science, what do you mean by science?
He just needs to understand. Forget giving alternatives. We just need to understand.
Yeah, but I like the alternatives because something's
going. I don't understand what you're saying.
The guy has a problem in the sense that he's got a different vision of the universe, of what science and religion and whatever is. And so please tell me what you think is science, what you think is religion.
Does that help him understand?
It might, because now you get into a debate and show him where he's got faults in his thinking process. You got to show him that he's got a problem with the way he's presenting the word science, the word religion.
So he's got a bug in his head, which is
preventing
him to understand what you're saying.
And what I'm saying there, please tell me what you're thinking. So what is your
version?
Get to
the bottom of this.
Yeah, so let's get to the same page.
What don't you understand?
Right.
It's kind of like that. Let's get to the bottom.
What don't you understand about understanding?
But then the question becomes: does the listener have to understand before we call it science?
Yeah, and again, we all have different foundations. A guy who's born in Vietnam, he's educated probably differently in many ways than you are, who are maybe an American or a Mexican or whatever, a Russian.
About physics? I think we all
No.
I mean,
no. In general terms, remember these people have a different philosophy. They have different traditions in what has come down to them, maybe from Buddhism, from Hinduism, or whatever. And that's kind of different than the notions of these religions, which were the original philosophies, you could say. They were different than what came out in the West. We came out of mythology, Greek mythology, when we went into Roman mythology, and from there we eventually extrapolated or invented, monotheism, one God, and we came up with Christianity, and Christianity broke up later in pieces, but, Protestantism, Orthodox religion, Christianity, they're all pretty much the same. They think of this one God out there and so on. And from there, then we came up with a scientific part, which supposedly said we're going to do experiments and try to explain them and forget about all this supernatural stuff. And what we did is just enter, irrationality. We ended up with all these concepts that we move around today. So that's the way this thing has evolved. But then, a person in the West who's educated under Western criteria has already a foundational difference from someone who's educated under Eastern philosophy, religion, etc. And so it doesn't mean that we're all educated in the same way. And you kind of have to get on the same page before you can even start explaining a theory and say, look, this is what we're going to call science, this is what we're going to call religion. You got to make it black and white, on and off, yes or no.
Instead of educated, I like the word brainwashing. It's more cynical. But it gets to the bottom of it. It gets to the point. There's no edge, because some people think, this is education, you're uneducated. No, he was just brainwashed in a different way than you were.
Okay, so let's summarize here. I just want to get the main point across. And the main point that I'm trying to make today is that rational philosophy, not the philosophy we've had in the last 10,000 years. We're talking about a new meaning, a new definition for the word philosophy. We'll call it.
It's hip.
Well, yeah, we'll call it. We'll call it a term. We'll call it rational philosophy to distinguish it from philosophy. So if there's, that helps you separate the two.
We didn't get to the bottom of rational philosophy.
Well, rational philosophy again, just in general terms. I mean, we may not get to the bottom of it, but let's just make sure we understand this. Rational philosophy is part of rational science. That means philosophy is only going to deal with explanations. What do we explain? Do we explain gravity? Do we explain, magnetism? No, those are subjects that fall under physics.
Unless those are people's names.
Right. Philosophy only deals with concepts, reasons, and purpose. Okay. Concepts, you may be talking about love. You may be talking about information. Abstract. We'll call them abstract concepts. Okay.
Yeah, but
abstractions.
Hold on. Wait.
Compared to physicality, which is what physics is about.
Start of another problem because you put objects, causes, and mechanisms under physics, and concepts, reasons, and purpose under philosophy. But it's always attached to a question.
Okay.
Is because you can have a concept in a question about physics. Can you have a concept in a question about physics? Can you have an object in the question about philosophy?
There are lines that are crossed, but we got to keep. Remember again, when I give a presentation, I'll introduce my beliefs, and you'll say, "Oh, but that's religion." You're talking about religion. Yeah, that little portion, that's belief. That's religion. And so all you have to do is say, okay, now he's talking about religion, now he's talking about philosophy, now he's talking about physics. As long as you can put that more or less in the proper context, you're okay.
No, but it's deeper, because if you say the object moved, we're just doing physics, right?
Yeah.
But moved is a concept.
No. And again, it is first of all, it is a concept. Yeah, it's a relation, no doubt about that. exist. All these words are concepts, but we're not dealing with the concept itself. We're not saying what is
motion.
Well, we are asking what is motion, but the purpose of defining these terms, of putting criteria there, is for the purposes of physics. Philosophy deals with something else. It deals with, why did I do something? What was the purpose? That's one way of looking at it. Another one is, you talk about love, or you're talking about psychology, why someone does something, behavior.
Okay,
and that's a little different than saying, well, did he move? How did he move?
No.
What do you mean by motion? That part is physics.
What is motion? But motion is a concept, so that's the problem.
But see, again, we're not talking about the concept itself when we say, look, rock moved.
No. The question is, what is motion? What does that question fall under?
Again, it's a definition that can be used.
No,
if you need it, it's a definition that you can use either in philosophy or in physics. If we use it in physics, we're just going to refer to the object that moved. If you're going to use it in philosophy, I'm not even sure what you can use the word motion in philosophy for.
No, I'm saying, what is the concept motion? I'm not saying
it's a concept, but we're not talking
something else.
But we're not.
No, you're not getting
talking
me.
about.
But that is what we're talking. Because if I want to know what is motion, not define the word so that we can use it for something else, it is the end in itself.
Every word in the dictionary is a concept. Every word and every definition is a concept. What else do you need now?
Because I want to know, the graph is missing some pieces because you're not talking about the questions. What we call science or what we call physics or what we call philosophy points to the question being asked, right? So you have to actually put question marks in this graph that you show, this table. It's not deals with objects because everything deals with it. Both.
No, yeah,
both
but that's a confused. That means you didn't understand.
No, because you're making it fuzzy.
No.
You say we harp on objects, but that's fuzzy. Because you think we're harping on objects, but I think we're harping on philosophy. Now it's just an opinion on what we're harping on what the main.
Absolutely. Now this is objective. This is totally objective, and physics deals only with objects and the movement of objects, and we're looking at causes and mechanisms. We have to define the terminology. Is a definition a concept? All definitions are concepts. That doesn't mean that physics deals with motion per se and say, well, what is motion? No, we define it and say, look, we're going to talk about objects, and we're going to say this moved. And the guy says, what do you mean by move? Then I define it, and it serves as a foundation for physics. But physics doesn't concentrate on the concept motion.
No,
it concentrates on the movement of objects because you need the word to explain why the object moved or how the object moved and how it caused an effect.
I'm saying that the chart is kind of fuzzy because we're talking about questions.
Okay.
Someone asks a question, and
right.
Now we have
explain this.
Now we have to discern: does that question fall under philosophy or does it fall under?
Okay. And what's the problem?
And the problem is this chart doesn't tell us if the question itself is not a comprehensive chart to point the question to one or the other because the question,
I thought it did. Show me where it doesn't. That's what I want you to show me.
If you ask what is motion, motion is a concept, and that's what we're harping on. We're harping on motion. What is motion?
What is motion we define motion.
Why can't
we define it because we're not going to use the word motion.
But I am.
We're not going to use the word motion to harp on the word motion. We're going to use the word. If you want to talk about motion, then it's going to be philosophy. Because you're talking about a concept, you're going to dissect the word motion, but that's not physics. Physics is, here's a definition, now I know what the word move means, and I'm going to say a rock moved, and now we're not concentrating on the word motion, we're concentrating on the rock and what it did, and motion is the word you need to explain that it moved from here to there.
Besides the fact, but I just wanted to know under what branch does the question, what is motion, fall under? And you said it's philosophy.
What is motion? If you're going to put a definition, and if you're going to harp on just the definition, and you're going to dissect the word motion, it falls under philosophy.
But it's not the definition; it's the concept.
All concepts are defined, and that's why concept is properly under philosophy. all concepts are defined. All definitions fall under philosophy, all of them.
Okay,
but the fact that once we define it, now we're going to use it as the foundation of physics. We're not going to harp on the concept location, on the concept motion, on the concept distance. We're not going to harp on the concept. We're not going to analyze the concept.
That's not what I'm talking about.
We're going to harp on saying these two objects have distance between them. We're going to use the word now in physics.
Yeah, but you keep turning my question into a definition question.
I
want to know what is motion? Is the answer to that question a definition?
It is a definition. It's a concept, so it's got to be defined. All concepts are defined. Where does concept fall under philosophy?
Okay, but so anytime we're asking what is something, what is a concept question, like ad libs, we put the words "what is" and then an underline. Put a concept here.
Yeah, but
it's always a definition that we're looking for.
But be careful with that because the word "what" is very confusing.
But for concepts.
Well, that's why we can't use the word "what."
But that's what I'm saying.
What is only objects, only, not in physics, not in ordinary speech. When you say science. What, see, I don't know what I said. Let me finish what I want to say. The word "what" should not be used like it is used in ordinary speech. In ordinary speech, we say, what do you mean by this? What is this? We use the word what? Wrong. You can't use that in science. In science, you say, how do you define this word? What is the definition of this word? What are the criteria for this definition? But in physics, what is an object? Whenever you say what, you're referring only to objects. You do not refer to concepts. You can't say what is love, not in physics.
But what about
you can say what is a rock, that's okay.
But that's physics. What about philosophy? Can you
ask
what is love?
And then you have a definition, but you can't say in philosophy what is a rock. No, because in physics you have to present a picture of a rock and say that's a rock. You point to objects. You don't define them.
But then the question is still valid. What is motion or what is love?
Yeah.
You can say what. If you put a concept at the end of that, it becomes a philosophical
No,
question.
the correct way to formulate and not use the word what, because the word what is misleading. What is a rock is a good term. You can't say what is love. Not in science, not in rational science. That's ordinary speech. You say what is the definition. You can say that. Give me the definition. You don't even use the word what. Give me the definition of love.
Why can't you say what is love?
Because what is a physical object. What always refers only to objects. You can't say, you can say what is a table. You can't say what is love. What is love already means, he's talking about physical object. That's the problem. The word what is very misleading. You got to be careful with the what, whys, and hows. We tend to bring ordinary speech in there, and that's where it becomes a serious problem. What? No, not for love. You can say define love. Define the word love.
Oh, we got a question from Dan. Is there an equivalent for concepts of the word exist, as in some concepts are more abstract than others, a bit like some objects are non-existent?
Well, objects non-existent, yeah, but is there an equivalent for concepts of the word exist? Yeah, the exist has synonyms like real.
No. He's asking, is it like love? We all know what love is, or we all have a somewhat gist of what it is. But if I come up with a new concept that no one knows, maybe it's less real.
Some concepts are more abstract. All concepts are abstract. Yeah. Concepts are all abstract. I mean, all concepts, again, we define concepts and point to objects. Pointing to objects, that's physics. Defining concepts, that's philosophy. But once you define the concept, once you got what the word love means, now the question is, can you use that in physics or can you use that in philosophy? And love is used in philosophy. Physics deals only with objects. But other than that, I'm not understanding well the question there. It's got to be phrased in a better way. Concepts are more abstract. They're all abstract. Okay, anyways, that's the general picture. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same station. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.